Oh, it's on now.
It's all now. Now I'm really nervous.
Don't be. I'm gonna mute myself and the floor is yours.
Okay. So my name's Aubrey and I'm a recovering meth addict. And my story is I grew up in Syracuse, so not too far from where I am now. I moved back in with my parents, so I live back at home. I'm the oldest, so I have a younger brother and a younger sister. And I grew up in a great family. I would consider my childhood like almost perfect. I um, swam on the swim team uh, almost competitively for almost 10 years. And I swam at a collegiate level and then at a national level. And that took up a lot of my time. And that's where I met a lot of my friends. And I spent just a lot of my free time. And that was something that I just loved doing. I enjoyed doing it. I also got into videography as well and started doing that and loved doing that. Um, and then as I got further, I got into college and I started going to school and I was doing well. I had a great roommates, I had great friends. And as I started to get further along into my degree, I found myself not knowing, what I wanted to do. I guess, let me back up. So when I look at my childhood and I look at how I grew up and where I grew up and the people that I had in my life, I would look at my life, someone would look at my life and say, she lived pretty perfect. She had a pretty perfect childhood. She had a pretty perfect life. And I don't say that to brag and I don't say that to, say my life was awesome. I say that because I lived a life that you wouldn't think, I would turn to addiction, I guess you would say. Somebody would look at my life and be like, she has everything that, anyone could ever want. And I took a lot of pride in that. And I think that's part of the reason that I got addicted in the first place is I was very naive. I didn't know what I was getting myself into. I grew up in the church. I grew up as a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And so drugs and alcohol and coffee were not something that were a part of my life growing up at all in the slightest. Like that's not something that the church believes in or practiced. And so that's nothing I ever was involved in at all. None of my friends were involved with it. And so as I started going to college and I started to go through school, and to pursue my degree, I started to get to a point where I didn't know what I wanted to do in life. I was in a relationship with a guy that started to get toxic. It was pretty toxic from the very beginning. He turned out to be pretty manipulative and abusive, not necessarily physically, but super abusive mentally and emotionally, and just very controlling and opinionated. And because of that, that started to stray me from my family and it started to pull me away from my family, which I've always been really close to. And so I started to feel, poor emotions from that. I started to feel down on myself about that. I knew my family didn't like who I was hanging out with or who I was spending my time with. I knew they didn't like him. And then on top of that, I started to gain weight after high school. I stopped loving to swim. And so I started to gain weight and my self-esteem started to lower as my weight started to get higher. And that was pretty defeating, I feel like. And through my degree, I got my associates and then I didn't know what else I wanted to do. I didn't know what I wanted to pursue. I didn't know what I wanted to go for. And so I started to feel guilty and shameful about that I was like, I know I'm supposed to go to school, but I don't know what I want to go for. And now I'm this college dropout and I just feel really like upset about that, like I know I'm supposed to continue going, but I don't know what I want to go for. So that started to weigh on me a little bit. And I just started to feel super lost. I didn't know who I wanted to be. I didn't know what I wanted to be. I didn't know where I wanted to go. I didn't know if I believed in the church. my little brother at the time was preparing to go on an LDS mission, and I didn't know if I believed what he was doing. I didn't know if that was true. And so I felt out of place with my family. And it just got to this point in my life where I just felt all alone. Like there wasn't anything in my life that brought me joy. And I was super anxious and I just didn't feel good. And so in this point of my life, I started to experiment with alcohol. I started out with alcohol and I was like, I've never done it. I've never grown up with it, but I've seen it in movies and on TV, and I know other people do it. So since I don't know what I'm doing with my life, why not start here? I mean, what if I enjoy this and this is what I want to do? So I started drinking alcohol and didn't, it made me feel good for a minute, but it didn't fix it, and then the next day I would feel so shameful for drinking that it made me feel worse on top of everything else. And so that didn't work. And then there was a time that I got offered weed. And so I tried weed. I said, I don't know what I'm doing with my life. I don't like who I am. I don't know where I'm supposed to be or what I'm supposed to be doing. So why not try weed? So I tried weed and, same thing, fixed it for a minute. And then it went right back to, I feel shameful for doing this. I feel guilty for doing this. And if my parents had any idea, they would be so upset. And I was so focused on everybody else's opinions that I was just, not even focusing on the weed making me feel good or the alcohol making me feel good. I was like, I'm such a terrible person for doing these things that it wasn't even bringing me joy. And so, I got off, I didn't do weed anymore. I stopped doing weed. And then I got offered mushrooms and I tried mushrooms and I did mushrooms for a while. And I was like, this doesn't do it for me either. Like this doesn't bring me any joy. And it just makes me feel dumb. And then I turned 21. And the day after I turned 21, I was moving apartments and I was with who I thought was a friend at the time, who he later turned out to be my dealer. He offered me some meth and he said, this will help you finish moving your apartment. I was getting to the point where I was so tired and it was late at night. And he was like, this is just the thing, like this will help you. And so I remember I was in my college dorm room and I took my first hit of meth the day after I turned 21. And that was it for me. That first hit, and that was all I could think about. I felt in a roundabout sort of way, it was like a breath of fresh air that I was like, I feel great. This makes me feel good. This makes me feel like I can do anything I never thought I could do. It gives me energy. It makes me happy. And it didn't even cross my mind the consequences that would come from that. And so further on into my story, it began to be something that I obsessed over. The next day, it's all I could think about. The day following, it was all I could think about. I would always pursue him and find him and ask him to let me use meth with him. And then it got to the point where I purchased my own pipe. I had my own stash. It just got worse. And I used it as a bribery for myself. I used it as, a reward for myself. After I would use it as like before I made a hard phone call, I could use. And then as soon as I finished the hard phone call, I could use as a reward. I could use prior to getting into the shower. And then after I finished my shower, I could use it after I got out of the shower. I could use it when I got up in the morning, and after I got dressed and ate my breakfast, I could use it afterwards as a reward. So it was this constant cycle of I can use it prior to something and then I can use it afterwards as well. So then it just got worse and worse and worse. And I just began to use more. And it got so bad that I was driving from Logan to Salt Lake 4, 5, 6 times a week just to go get more. I was driving so often, and it didn't bother me. I thought it was fun. I thought it was exciting. I was very intrigued with how everything worked, and the whole wait for the dealer to come outside, the whole just everything was high paced, and I just loved that about it. I loved the adrenaline rush that I got from it. And eventually I was still living in Logan. I dropped out of school. I wasn't going to school anymore. And I was still working. I worked construction at the time. And it got to the point where all I could think about was using. And so rather than going into work, I decided I didn't want to go into work. And so I started to lie. I lied ever since I was young. I always lied. I lied often. I lied about a lot of things growing up. And I consider myself a very bad or maybe good people pleaser. I like to please people. So I would lie about the dumbest things. I would lie about stupid stuff. And but while I was working construction, I didn't want to go to work anymore. All I wanted to do was use all day. So I started making up stories. And eventually it got to the point that I spun a story so big that I made up the story that my sister had passed away from cancer, following my mom passing away from cancer 2 months later, and my dad running off to Colorado with his girlfriend that was half his age. And I told this around the job site, and I just wanted time off. I just didn't want to go to work. And I thought to myself, this is the story. Like this is great. People are going to believe it. No one's going to question me about these things. Like everyone's going to believe it. And I didn't think anything of the consequences. I didn't think into the future at all. All I could think about is wanting to use, then the next time I could use. And so my story caught up with me, and I lost my job. And at that point, I really didn't care that I lost my job. And my parents found out at that point that I was using. I'd been using for about 5 months at that time. And so they found out, and they tried to get me to stop. They came up to Logan and they had a whole conversation with me about how I should stop, and I didn't care. It didn't matter to me. And then shortly after I lost my job, my dealer moved from Logan to Salt Lake. And so I followed him there. And even leaving all of my stuff here, or all of my stuff in Logan, I followed him there, and I lived there in a meth house in South Salt Lake. And all I did was use. I didn't have a job for probably 2.5 months, and I didn't care. It didn't bother me. I ran through my savings, and I got to the point where I didn't have anything. I didn't have all of my stuff. All of my stuff was in Logan. I didn't have the gas to get to Logan, but it didn't matter to me. All I cared about was using. And I look back at that, and I don't think I had even told myself yet or come to terms with the fact that I was an addict. I was playing it as life's fine. I got it under control. It's okay. Like I will figure it out. I wasn't applying for jobs. But somehow I was going to figure it out, and it was going to work out. So I just look back at that as I was naive to think that I was okay and what I was doing was okay, and that I wasn't addicted. And I think it's because I didn't have any prior knowledge of what addiction was. I didn't understand it because there's no one in my family that has dealt with addiction. And so I didn't know, what I was getting myself into. But anyway, I fast forward to my addiction, further into my addiction, and it got to the point of me living in the meth house for free for so long that finally I got kicked out and I was homeless. And so I lived out of my truck for a total of 8 months. And I eventually got the money to then go back to Logan and clear all my stuff out of my apartment on the last day possible. And I brought it all down and I put it in a storage unit, and I lived out of a storage unit, and I lived out of a truck, out of my truck. And, I thought that that's how life was and that was going to be okay. I thought that who cares that I live out of my truck? I can make this work. As long as I can use my meth, I can make this work. It doesn't matter to me. As long as I can get my dope and I'm here in Salt Lake close to my dealer, that's what's important to me. And so it just eventually spiraled into I was homeless and I didn't have any money. I had a job, but I finally did get a job, but I was spending my money only on dope and only on my storage unit. I eventually bought a gym pass to only shower at the Planet Fitness. And other than that, I didn't have money for food. I snuck into hotels every morning and ate breakfast at the hotel. And I shoplifted. Shoplifting became another one of my addictions. That's what I spent my time doing. And I just lived a life that I thought this is okay. This is fine. This is an okay life. And this is how my life is going to be. And, eventually it got so bad that my emotions would run wild. When I was happy, I was really happy. And when I was sad, I was really sad. And when I was mad, I was really mad. And I started to behave in ways that I never would have behaved before. And looking back, it's kind of frightening the ways that I behaved. While I was at the meth house, there was a time that I got so angry that I punched out the window of the home, and I had to go to the hospital and get stitches for it. And there was another time in my addiction that I punched my hand straight through a car window, and I just went on with the rest of my day as if that was normal. I just went on, and that was that. I behave that way because I'm an addict. I act that way because I'm an addict. This is happening to me because I'm an addict, and that's the life I'm gonna live. And further into my addiction, as it started to get darker and more lonely, I began to realize, what I had gotten myself into. And I started to come to terms with the fact that I was an addict and I couldn't function without using more than 10 minutes at a time. That's what my world revolved around. I didn't care about my family. I didn't care about friends. And there was a morning that I was up in the middle of the night, and I was actually on the run from the cops. And I really, really wanted a drink from Maverick. And so I went to the closest Maverick, and all I had was pocket change. And I took my foam cup in there that I had been refilling for I don't know how long. And I refilled it with some soda, and I took it up to the counter and I started counting out the change. And I started with the bigger, like the nickels and the quarters and the dimes. And then eventually I got to mostly pennies. And the girl at the counter was like, it's okay. I'll cover it. Like, don't worry about it. And I was so grateful. And I was like, thank you so much. Like this, you don't know what I'm dealing with. Like, thank you so much. And I went back and got in the truck, and I left the Maverick, and I pulled around the corner, and I took a sip of my soda, and it was just carbonation. It wasn't any syrup. It was just carbonation. And I started to sob and sob and sob. And it was at that point in my addiction that I was like, I am so upset over the fact that I can't afford an 88-cent soda. And this is pathetic. Like, this is a joke that I used to be the most responsible, independent human, and now I can't even afford a soda. And so shortly after that, I ran out of my stash and I didn't have any more money. I ran out of dope and I didn't have any more pocket change and I didn't have anything else to sell. And I decided I don't want to do this anymore. Like I'm sick and tired of being sick and tired, and I don't want to do it anymore. And so I got involved with a physical altercation with my dealer at the time, and the cops showed up, and I had to decide what I was going to do. I didn't want to spend my whole day not using and also just sitting around doing nothing. So I picked up the 1,000-pound phone that we talk about in recovery, and I called my mom. And I remember sitting on the curb and crying, and she answered the phone, and she said, hey, what's up? I hadn't called her and I don't know how long. And I was quiet for a while, and I said, I want to come home. I want to come home. And she said, okay, well, come home then. And I said, I have no gas in my tank. I have no money. I can't come home. I can't get there. I'm about 2 hours away and I can't get home. And so she said, okay, well, let me call your dad and figure out where he is. And then we'll come and get you. Like, we'll come and pick you up. So she called my dad, and she found out that my dad was actually working 5 minutes from where I was. And so he showed up, and he gave me a big hug as soon as he saw me, and he gave me his lunch. And it was the first meal that I'd had in days. And then my mom showed up shortly after, and they told me that it was going to be okay, and that because of the support that I have in my life, I was going to be okay, and that I was going to be able to get through this. And I believed them at the time. And for the first time in months, I felt hope and I felt safe for a second. And so they took me home, and I started to withdraw on their couch. And I spent the day I spent 4 days on their couch asleep. And I don't remember it. I don't remember any of that time period, but I guess I spent those 4 days asleep. They only woke me up to eat, and then I went straight back to sleep. I didn't shower. I was disgusting. And on the 5th day, my drug dealer got out of jail, and he called me and he said, I need you to take me to Montana to see my kids. And looking back now, I realize it wasn't a smart decision, but having been through what we'd been through, I decided, okay, I'll take you to Montana. Like, okay, you helped me through my crap, I'll help you through yours, so I'll take you to Montana. So I got up and I left my family without telling them where I was going. And I got up and left and put them through hell again. And I just left. I just disappeared. And we got to Montana, and I found myself in Montana again with no money and no way to get home. And that was that. And so I again began to feel lonely. At this point, I hadn't been using, and so I started to feel all of the emotions that I was feeling. And I was scared, and I was alone, and I was in a place that I was not familiar with. And I got stuck in Montana for a total of 3.5 weeks. And there was a time that I was through that time on day 35, 30, I reached out to my family and told them, hey, I've gone 30 days sober. And my mom was like, cool, like, don't you get a 30-day chip or something like that? Like on 30 days. And I was like, sure. And I started to lie about it, that I was like, yeah, I've been to AA meetings, like, definitely. And so I got on Amazon to try and find a chip, and I came across a chip that it has a dragonfly on it, and it says 1 day at a time, and it has the Serenity Prayer on the back. And I decided that I was going to make dragonflies my symbol, because they are symbols of survivors. And I was like, oh, that's cool. Like, I'll make dragonflies my symbol. That's awesome. And in Montana, I stayed at a KOA. And so I found that chip that night, and I went to sleep at the KOA, and I woke up and I came out of my tent the next morning, and there was a dragonfly sitting right on the picnic table of my campsite that I'd been staying at for 3.5 weeks. And I am not a person to believe in coincidences. And I decided, this is like that, there's a sign, like there's a reason for that. Like, this is what I'm supposed to be doing, but I'm not supposed to be doing it alone. And so I got involved in another physical altercation with my dealer, and I talked to the cops, and the cops told me, you should probably call your parents. And they did some more research, and they found that I'd been listed as a missing person in Utah for almost a week. And so my parents had no idea where I was or what I was up to. So I ended up calling them again, picked up the 1,000-pound phone, called them and said, hey, I want to come home, and told them where I was. And they drove 10.5 hours through the night to come and get me. And they picked me up and they took me home. And since then, I have, life didn't get better once I stopped using meth. I didn't stop using meth and then the next day woke up to sunshines and rainbows and the birds chirping. I stopped using meth and I woke up the next day to everything still on fire. And I think that's important to note because, like myself, I had no idea what I was getting myself into when I started using. I had no idea how to get myself out. And then I had no idea that once I stopped using, my life wasn't just going to get better. I had a whole mess that I had to clean up. And I've had upsets along the way that have been really frustrating and have pushed me to want to use. On day 43, I totaled my truck that I'd lived in for 8.5 months, and that was devastating. And all I wanted to do was use. That's all I wanted to do. That's all I could think about. But I had made a goal with myself that that wasn't what I was going to do. And since then, I've joined a group that's local here in Ogden, and it's called Recovering Addict. And it's something that I go to. I attend every week. I attend Monday, Wednesday, Friday. And what we do is we work out for an hour, and then we have group for an hour. And in that group, we work out what we call is our biopsychosocial. So we work out our bodies, and then we work out our minds, and then also we work on social as well. So those relationships that I've burned, I've learned how to repair those and make new ones. And it's something that I don't take for granted any day. Like I'm so grateful for the opportunity that I have to be a part of something. And I've learned in my recovery that I've had to replace using with good habits. So I focus on my recovery as much as I did on using, and I focus on going to recovery groups every day, if not 2 every day. I read recovery books. I do my step work religiously. It's something that I've had to replace the bad parts of my addiction with the good parts of my addiction. And I'm so grateful for that opportunity because I've met so many people and I've come to be a part of something so great. And in the coming months, I will actually be the first official graduate from Recovering Addicts program. And I'm super excited for that. And one thing that I've learned, one of the most important things I've learned from my addiction is I'm grateful for it because of it, I've had the opportunity to open my mind and to see people in a different way and to have patience and empathy for people that I didn't have before because of how I grew up. And so I'm thankful for my addiction and I'm thankful for my recovery. And yeah, that's what I got.